I'm a capitalist, a developer, chartered accountant. For the majority of my life, I certainly have not practiced environmental design or development. And when I look back at why I didn't, it was clearly as a result of my education. In university, we didn't talk about the environment. When we did, it was from the perspective that if you're good to the environment, it's a cost of business. So, of course, when I left school, I came from the perspective, do the minimal amount possible to avoid prosecution. And about 8 years ago, I stopped developing. And the reason I stopped developing wasn't because I wasn't making money. It was more from the perspective of I just couldn't look at myself in the mirror anymore. I couldn't look at my kids in the mirror anymore. I was fighting with groups like the Sierra Club. And I just didn't feel like there was any value in my life. And so I got involved in this project, which ended up being Canada's first LEED Gold project. And, it was the first green building I ever got involved in. And I must admit, when I first got involved, I came from the perspective of really trying to get some free press public relations. So it wasn't really a holistic motive at the time. But then I read a book called Natural Capitalism. And to me, that it woke me up a bit, because it talked about the value of our natural capital and how we as human beings are not separate from nature. We're part of nature. It talks about the concepts that, waste is food. In nature, there's no waste. It's only humans that create waste. And it talked about how we need to look to the environment for solutions and how we run our businesses. So I entered this journey with that newfound knowledge. Obviously developed a building that got a lot of environmental claim, built it on budget, started to really prove out the economics of ecological design. Then I started to discover, what we were doing has profound impacts on society. Like if you can design buildings that have save 99% of the waste, that impacts landfill sites. When you can design projects like Dockside that treat its own sewage and reuses treated water to flush toilets and that's going to have an impact on regional infrastructure. If you design communities that address compact communities that have alternative transportation strategies, you're going to reduce road infrastructure. Started looking at schools that were built with daylighting and natural ventilation. Kids got higher marks. That in the healthcare sector, hospitals that were built better, patients healed faster. Healthier buildings, people were more productive. So I started to see the changes that were happening that you could make happen in society that would save a lot of money. And then something else really funny started happening to me, and it's really been, I would say, over the last 8 months, is I started dabbling in this concept of the triple bottom line. Really not coming from this perspective of how much money I can make so I can invest in ecological or social principles, but really coming from the perspective of how do you go about designing things that embrace all three of those principles. And ever since I've taken that on, I've discovered a funny thing happens when you do that. The economics get better anyways. But what's really happening is the values are changing. It always strikes me odd that when we go home and we look our children in the eyes, we want our children to obviously get good grades, be good citizens. We want them to have a kind heart. We want them to be respectful of the environment. And yet we as businessmen, we as politicians, we go into our everyday lives and we forgot about our values. And so we started to really take this approach of embracing values and how we develop our projects. Because as a company, I was seeing some of our other projects were struggling, yet Dockside was starting to emerge as some amazing things were starting to happen at Dockside. And one of the things I thought the reason is that people were buying into the values. Like our contractor, for instance, who I've known for years and years, the guy's values have changed. When I talked about First Nations training, to give you a story, in the middle of the zoning, someone asked me to engage the First Nations people, and I immediately slipped into my old traditional thinking, saying, geez, I don't want to talk to them. I mean, we took this land away from them a long time ago. Why would I bring that into the equation right in the middle of a rezoning process? And then at night, someone sent me some photos of when they were kicked off the land, and the children were in the canoes, and it really shook me up. And I said, this is crazy, Joe. You got to talk to them. So I sat down with the chief, and like any white guy would do, I started saying, well, I'm going to get you a job training program. I'm going to do some historical signage on site. And in the middle of that discussion, I just stopped and I looked at the chief and I said, this is bullshit. I mean, I don't know what the hell you need. I'm a white guy. You know, the reality is we took this land away from you. How about we work together to heal it? And how about we work on healing our cultures? And this created this whole new opening for this dialogue that's now resulted in, for instance, that we're taking First Nations people through a mentoring program. We're going to get them on-site working. We're going to get them trained in grade 10 English and math. My contractor has bought into this, and that he wants to put this forward regionally. So when I see that, how my contractor, my subtrades or values are changing, and then I start to see the impact on our project, it's amazing. Like, one of the things I was scared about in this project was, could we do LEED Platinum? Could we do street sewage? Could we do biomass? Could I do this and meet our budgets? You know, could I get labor? I mean, like in this town now, everyone's having trouble getting construction labor. Everybody's over budget. Look at Dockside. You know, our first phase is 70% constructed. We have not touched our contingency budget. In 20 years in the development business, I've never seen that happen. We've had no problems with labor supply. And I think it all comes down to the triple bottom line, because people's values are changing. They're excited about the project. And Dockside came about because, you know, a city made a stand. Denise is here. I mean, you know, I know Denise, and, you know, Denise has those values, and she pushed to make sure when that land got sold that it was valued differently, not just strictly from the economic bottom line, but from, you know, the social and the environmental principles. So I think that's where we're starting to dabble in now, because I'm just finding that it's kind of weird when you wake up every morning and some days you hate yourself because you know you've done something wrong, and then you start questioning yourself all the time. You know, the other day I was down in shopping because I needed a new pair of cords, and it was interesting. I was reading this book called The Soul of Money, and in there it says, you know, do you really need that new pair of cords? You know, and then it said, okay, if you need those cords, you know, why don't you ask questions of where those cords come? So I immediately went down and bought Patagonia, you know, because he's an amazing company. He does organic wools. He's got the right value system. And if we all started doing that, like, we don't tender anymore on our job site. I'm handpicking people that are actually have the right values, and that's translating into better economics. And where we've struggled as a company is when we're not picking those that have those consistent values. And we're not sharing with them because we don't believe that if we share our values with them, they'll understand those values. They think it's too touchy-feely. But, you know, make no mistake about it, I'm a capitalist. You know, if anything, I'm probably a little right of center. But the problem is we have just forgotten who we are as humans. And I think it's time that we just, every day when we go to work, we remember our children and what we stand for. And the issues around climate change, I'm absolutely convinced we can beat this issue. And I hate it when I take my kids down to Inconvenient Truth and they come out and totally depressed. You know, and I looked at them and said, don't be depressed about this. This is a huge opportunity. Man has the ability to do this. We've had, you know, industrial revolutions. We can do a cultural revolution here. And I'm absolutely convinced we can beat this issue.